what we're going to be talking about today, more or less, is the teleological argument. So, before you jump to any presumption about, oh, I already know what the teleological argument is, it concerns this, that, or the other, well, we're actually going to talk about two different versions of that. There's something of a classical version of the teleological argument, somebody like Aquinas would put forth, or Aristotle. But then there's also something of a current or a modern version. When I say modern, we're stretching that, we're using that a little loosely, but something like William Paley's watchmaker argument, or something like current ID theorists, intelligent design. Because what these arguments want to do, the Paley version and the current versions, what they want to look at is that things look designed. So if they look designed, then they must be what? They must be designed. Now, this is where natural selection has come in and offers something of a defeater for this argument, because the argument is that this looks designed, all designs have designers, therefore this must have a designer. Obviously, I've constructed just a very loose syllogism, it's not even valid, but you get the point of that. Something looks designed, it had to have been designed, God designed it. Now, the problem with that, the natural selection argument, all it has to do is offer a defeater to say that, well, yes, this looks designed, but we'll give you a reason as to why this looks designed. Natural selection offers this reason as to why it looks designed, therefore this argument may not necessarily be true. And if you're concerned with just the logical structure of that, well, then that's all it has to do. It just has to offer a possible alternative. Now, we could argue those points, and you can get into that, but we're not going to do that. We're not necessarily concerned with the modern version of that argument. And again, the modern version is, especially the modern, as in intelligent design theorists, what they really want to point out is something called irreducible complexity, or aside from biological functions, or aside from biological forms of life, as if there's another form of life besides the biological, they want to look at the cosmological. They want to look at the universe itself. They want to look at the fine-tuning for existence. They want to look at all the combinations, all the factors that come into what makes it possible that human beings are here. Now, again, to just oversimplify their argument, they're going to say something to the effect of, look, the more complex something becomes, the probabilities for that bringing something into existence, or the probability of all of these complex features coming together to provide, say, life to exist, the more you multiply those different aspects, the probability just it becomes astronomically idiotic to say that this is a result of chance. Why? Because you're bringing more into the ball game. You're bringing this. You're bringing the gravity. You're bringing the number of atoms within the universe itself. You're bringing the strong and weak nuclear forces, how they have to be tweaked. You're bringing all kinds of information and saying the more that you bring in, the more complex, the probability just starts to get crazy. Let's put it that way. Now, the old version of the teleological argument is not concerned with that. Because remember, science can sometimes, and has in many cases, come along and said, we know that this looks as if it's to be the case in regards to design or what have you. But here's a possible explanation for that. Because the critique of modern intelligent design is that basically many would say that they're trying to appeal to a God of the gaps. This looks very complex. We don't know how this happened. Let's fill in the gap of our knowledge with God. That's one of the current critiques. Whether that works there or not, that's up for debate, because again, we're not going to worry necessarily about that argument, but just so that you have some understanding, or at least know something of that, there's that argument, or actually, like we said, an oversimplification or a very general use of that. What we want to look at more today is something of the classical version of the teleological argument. We want to look at a version of the argument that would say, I don't care if something looks designed. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I want to look at why things happen over and over and over and over and over and over again to some purpose, or to some end, or to some goal. Now, of course, you have somebody like David Hume that comes along and says, we can't find those things out, that's all inductive, we can't necessarily know what causes constitute what, and so on and so forth. But let's just put that aside for the moment, just to appreciate at least a sampling of this argument. Somebody like Aristotle and Aquinas would say, look, we see things going to some end. So, for instance, if you strike a match, no one is ever worried that when you strike that match, that a bouquet of flowers is going to pop up, or that a commode or a toilet bowl is going to appear in your living room when you strike a match. No one is concerned about that. people know that for the most part, when a match is struck, all things being equal, no crazy winds, no whatever, you're not in a vacuum, that is going to have the end of producing a flame. Now this version, the classical version of the teleological argument, asks the question, why? Why do we see things in nature, or to be more specific, in biology, or whatever the case may be, even cosmology, why do we see things going towards these ends over and over and over again? Now, that is a why question. Now, a lot of modern scientists, say Dawkins or even Peter Atkins, they want to say that there's no such thing as why questions. They want to say that they're only how questions, and that why questions are irrelevant and they're ridiculous. Now, you may think that I'm oversimplifying that. No, I'm not. There are scientists that want to say that. There are some that really want to say that. Do all of them? No, that's not the claim. But some do want to say that there's no such thing as a why question. There are only how questions. Obviously, we see that how questions are concerned with how something works. So, for instance, the water's boiling. Why is the water boiling? Well, in that specific mindset, somebody would say, well, really what Russ is asking is not why is that water boiling? They're asking how is it boiling? The temperature is brought up to a certain point. It heats up the molecules, they start to speed up, so on and so forth. How the water is boiling is answered. But we would say no. What if there's another reason as to why is the water boiling? Say I want to boil some hot dogs, or I want to whatever. There's another answer. There's a how question as to how the water's boiling, but there's also a why question as to why that's happening. There's two explanations at work there. Some scientists that are sold out to scientism, which is a philosophical standpoint as opposed to just science itself, want to try and reduce all questions to how. Notice that if they do that, they can never tell you why a pumpkin, as G.K. Chesterton would say, grows from a seed to a pumpkin and not from a seed to a lawn chair or to a barn or what have you. They would have to say at the end of the day, well, it just does. Why does this pumpkin move from this, or this pumpkin seed move from this seed to a pumpkin and not to something else? It just does. It just does. Now, we intuitively recognize that that's not sufficient. That if I were to walk into a room and say, hey, God exists, and someone were to say, why does God exist? Or how do you know that God exists? And I say, he just does. You'd be laughed right back out of the classroom or wherever you may be, and you ought to be laughed out of there because you can't just walk in and say, it just does at the end of the day. So this argument, tracing all this back, this argument, the teleological argument, asks the serious question of why does something always move to this particular end? All right, so let's give an example as to just our intuitive sense of why questions being legitimate. Let's say that one of these particular scientists walks in a late night debate. They've been arguing against, let's say, the existence of God with Joe Blow, philosopher. They walk home, the debate ends a little early, gets home and he sees his wife, unfortunately, with some other man. Let's say that he walks in and he wants to know what is going on. Now, is he going to run up to his wife and say, how are you cheating on me? When he says, why are you doing this? Does he mean, well, what I really mean is, how are you doing it? Now, we don't need to get into the details of how that's happening. No, what he wants to know is why are you doing this? And he's not going to accept from his wife or his potential enemy there that there's a legitimate response in saying, let me just tell you how I'm doing what I'm doing. No, that's ridiculous. So enough of that. We can move along with that. Back to this particular argument of in the teleological argument, things have final causes. Again, I can hear some people almost laughing from the other end of the screen. Oh, efficient causes, material causes, final causes, those formal causes, those things have been debunked for centuries. No, they haven't. There are great arguments to believe that we still have causes that are not just efficient causes or material causes. Why? Because otherwise we have no reason at all. Literally, remember, we just have to say at the end of the day, well, it just does. We have no reason at all to say, if things don't have a formal or a final cause, that when you do X, that Y will be a result. Or vice versa. When you do A, that B will be a result of that. In fact, as Edward Fazer says, you can't even make sense of efficient and material causes unless there are such things as a final cause or an end goal to this particular phenomenon that we're witnessing. Okay, very quickly. A lot of information here, but just very quickly, oversimplification, 4 causes. Let's take a red Solo cup, for example. an efficient cause, a material cause, a formal cause, and a final cause. Now, what is the efficient cause of a red solo cup? Let's say that we see a whole line of these red solo cups on some assembly line somewhere, or you're in some cheap grocery store at 3 a.m. in the morning that you shouldn't be at, and you see a bunch of red solo cups. All right, what is that? What's the cause of that? Well, you have the efficient cause of that. The efficient cause would be the guy, the machines, whatever, that put those solo cups together, that constructed the things. That would be the official cause. That would be the efficient cause, excuse me. The material cause would be what? It would just be the plastic stuff that it's made of. It would just be the material which constitutes the red solo cups sitting there. So you have an efficient cause, you have a material cause. So far, nothing controversial. Everybody agrees with that. Something brought the red solo cups into existence, a bunch of guys or machines. They were made out of something, a material cause, the plastic, whatever they're made of. Now, here's the controversial type stuff that we're getting into, but I think it'll make sense. And again, a lot of information, we're trying to boil it down very quickly. The formal cause of the red solo cup is what? It's the blueprint or the idea or the design of what that solo cup is supposed to be like. So for instance, if somebody's going to make the red solo cups, they don't just walk over and start just willy-nilly starts moving their hands around in plastic or whatever. They have a design, they have an idea, they have a blueprint in their mind that's the form of what that red solo cup is supposed to be. So you've got the efficient cause. Let's say that I'm I want to make the solo cup. I'm the efficient cause of that. We've got the material cause, the plastic, have the idea or the form of a red solo cup that makes that what it is. It gives its features, so to speak. And then we would have the final cause. Now, what is the final cause of the cup? What is the end goal of that cup? We could look at it in this sense, in a way of saying purpose. The final cause of that cup is what? To hold a legal beverage. That's the final cause of a red solo cup, is to hold that beverage. There's a purpose to the thing. There's not just the efficient cause, the material cause. There's also a formal cause, and there's a final cause to it. So we see that exemplified in, say, a red solo cup. We see those 4 causes at work there. Now we could also, again, oversimplify, but let's say that I want to make a table. I want to make a table. Well, why do I want to make a table? Usually when we ask why, we're usually asking the final cause. Again, going back to the teleos of that thing. We're asking the final cause. Why do I want to make a table? I want to do my homework on the table. I want to sit at the table, whatever. I'm giving you the answer to that question in its why, in its purpose. Well, then the other causes come into play. I am the efficient cause of it. I go make it. I find material cause on the table. I use wood, whatever, metal, whatever they make tables out of now. The form, the idea, the blueprint in my mind that brings that together to be what it is in that sense. It's whatness, what it is. And the final cause, we already mentioned, the purpose of the thing. So very quickly, a lot of information there, but that's going to give you a quick overview of the 4 causes of Aristotle and Aquinas. So, in regards to the universe, in regards to people, to biological life, so to speak, in regards to anything that we see, where we see causal patterns or causal regularities, we can say, now some of these we can be confused on. That's not the argument. You can be confused on some of these, no problem. But if there are any that we can say, when A is done, B will be a result. In fact, if you want to argue that we can't know that, then you've just flushed science down the toilet. Because science is concerned with what? Reproducing experiments in the laboratory, doing this particular thing so that this will result. And if this does that enough times, then we supposedly have made a leap forward in our knowledge of some particular problem, whatever it may be, the particular hypothesis that was being worked on there. You do this, this will be a result. Now again, that can only be explained if you can count on the fact that there will be that result every single time, considering all the circumstances are equal. Why? Because there's a gearing towards that end. There's a gearing towards that goal or that final cause that it's going towards. Now, Aquinas would say the argument like this. He would say, now, if an arrow is going through the air and it's going towards some particular goal, say the target, but the intelligence is not in the arrow itself, then why is it going towards that target repeatedly? He'd say because there's an intelligence outside of that moving it towards that goal, which would be what? Which would be the archer. The archer shoots the arrow constantly is going towards that particular goal, the target, but the intelligence is not in the arrow, but it's moving towards a goal as if it has purpose and function. He would say, right, because the archer is directing that towards that end or that purpose. Now, obviously, if we can't connect the parallel there, we'll try to help you here. Here we go. If things are going towards ends or purposes, they're going towards a goal. Grass always has this particular goal. Acorns always have this particular goal. Rocks, when they fall, have this particular goal because of gravity and so on and so forth. If we can see these causal regularities, are you satisfied with saying, why does that happen? It just does. No reason, no rhyme or reason to it at all. Or is it more plausible to say, because if we see something going towards a goal repeatedly, on a regular basis, just as if we were to see an arrow driving or going towards its end goal in the target, there's an intelligence that would drive that or direct that towards its final end, its final goal. Otherwise, at the end of the day, remember, you have to toss out science. You have to flush science because you can't really say that will continue to do that. It just happened to at that point in time. So anyway, there's a very brief overview of the intelligent design particular argument, that teleological argument, with the more classic and the one that I feel is more persuasive, especially if we have the time to go through the details of that argument. Hopefully that gives you a flavor of both of those arguments and it can open up for some discussion now.